Bam.
I'm Tyler Gray, and this is the Break It Down Show.
That's right. We're here on location. As you guys know, I love doing these things. Thanks for doing this with me and hosting me. One of the best things about my job, and a lot of it's like my spy job when I was a counterintelligence agent, is I get to go to someone else's home and someone famous. I mean, you're famous. You've done things, right? But even people who are actors or world famous musicians, you come to their house and they're like, oh, my wife, this has happened. My wife baked you her favorite cookies. And so now I'm their guest in their house. And it creates a neat dynamic. So thanks for letting us set it up. And
we're also lucky that you were close enough to be able to come here pretty easily.
Yeah.
Just worked out.
Yeah.
Coincidence, really.
I'm glad to deploy myself, though. I mean, I'll drive pretty far for not every show, but a lot of shows, you know?
Yeah. No, I think there's a lot of value in going, getting on the road and going to different places and changing the setting up a little bit. And, consistency is good, but I think it's also good to, it's like if you do an interview with, a lot of big interviews they do at the people's place because the interviewer learns more about the person by being there. So.
Yeah. Like I can look at your books behind you and all that and derive some kind of assessment of that. I mean, I see a lot of combat books. Great. We know about that stuff.
It's kind of a random assortment. I've got a ton more books than that.
Yeah. But Robert Greene is interesting.
Power,
yeah.
It's a great book.
It is. There's a lot in that book. I had Robert Greene on the show, and you get to build up not only through reading books, but the experience of having exchanges with these folks because they're all more accessible now. Mm-hmm. We can learn a lot about anything, and over thousands of shows, you get a PhD in people and things.
Yeah. Well, you look at like Rogan. Rogan knows a lot, for lack of a better term, because he's learned a lot from having a lot of unique guests who say unique things, and he extrapolates a lot of information from that, which is also why, quite frankly, people watch those shows. Is they learn something. That's funny. Yeah, Robert Greene. The thing I like about the 48 Laws of Power is how he gives the law, but then after he gives a historical example of why it's a law, then he gives a counter. Yeah. A historical example of a time someone did the exact opposite of the law and it worked, which I thought was that was really cool because there's exceptions to every rule. And I thought it was awesome that he put that in there,
There's so much of that life is like that, where you think it's an A-B balance, but it turns out not only is there a C axis, but there's also an F axis you hadn't even thought of. And I think combat has a lot of that in it, where like I was getting ready to go on patrol. And this is ridiculous, right? But that's how combat is. And so I go back to grab something for my kit, and the door handle ping, comes off in my hand. So now the thing that I need is behind a locked door. And we were able to sort it out because, of course, my key doesn't work in that lock. It's just like all these dumb things, And combat is like that. It has like these different axes that makes it hard to create a balance in a world. And I think when we come back, we're always looking for that F axis to decide like when it's going to come trip us up. I always feel like there's trap doors underneath me.
Yeah. That's something that I was talking to somebody yesterday actually about this exact same thing. And it's, I talk a lot about, the chaos addiction and my concept of LTSD and all those things. And, one of the things about the LTSD is that when your baseline is chaos, or when you had a traumatic childhood, as an example, your nervous system, you're physically in an ANS. Whenever everything is calm and fine, there's this fundamental fear, anxiety, or anxiety that you fear the other shoe falling. Right? So it's like everything's good, but you've got this massive fear because based on experience, you're waiting for something to go wrong. So it's almost like I don't want to say happiness, but your happy moments or your calm moments or your serene moments or your peaceful moments are destroyed by this anxiety and fear of feeling like something bad is going to happen. And one of the things that I did, and I think a lot of veterans, first responders, and people with traumatic childhoods do, is they create the problem. Because it's like I always say, it's like, you know, if I hold a fist, you know, this close to your face and I'm going to hit you, you know, I'm going to hit you. At a certain point, you're just like, just fucking hit me and get it over with. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like, I would rather you just punch me rather than you know, me waiting for the punch to happen. So instead of living in that anxiety and fear, we create the punch in order to just get it over with. And I think that's I call it creating chaos. And I think that is a very, very common mechanism for people with our backgrounds.
Yeah. There's a lot in there. There's like, we tend to categorize things in certain ways and we forget about the other categories. It's back to the F axis, right? So we think about flight or fight.
Yeah.
And then you're like, oh, but there's also freeze. And then there's probably other auto responses.
Yeah, they threw a new one out recently, which is fawn. I don't think fawn's a great word. I think they used it because it has an F and they wanted to keep the F theme. But fawn is basically, think of it as like, for lack of a better term, like Stockholm syndrome, where you're presented with something that, you know, activates that response. And, you know, fight is obvious, flight, obvious, freeze, obvious. Fawn would be negotiating or trying to you know, appear friendly to the threat or you know what I mean? Something to where it's, and again, I don't think I do think that exists and we do see it. I just think fawn's a bad word for it. But currently I think they're at 4 responses.
And in the light of Robert Greene, and when it doesn't work, you go, Hans, booby. And he gets shot in the head. Trying to fawn. The angel, devil, destroyer. I think that model from your book that you put in there, man, I've got a lot of that. Like I suck working within corporate America. For corporate America, I can handle that because it's on my own terms. But I was too much of a wild horse now. I mean, I grew up kind of running around. I wasn't a bad kid, but I was mischievous. And then in the military, you can't control counterintelligence agents when they're out in the field. And then I was better at working for the Army instead of inside of it, right? Because I could, as long as I can get the commander to understand that I was there to help them, they would give me control over their whole unit, basically. They're like, yeah, go here, go wherever you want to go, because what you're giving me, I can't get anywhere else. That doesn't make you, it's not that I can't work for a boss, but I like to work for the boss. And there's a difference there. So some of that destroyer comes out of me when I'm bound by these things and I can't thoroughbred something that I think I can thoroughbred. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, it makes a ton of sense. I would, I don't know if argue is the right word, but I would say that in my experience, when I came up with the concept of the warrior and destroyer, which is really, two, for lack of a better term, different characters that I named to represent the two different sides that are at war and at conflict in our own minds. The warrior being the innate us, and then the destroyer being the us or the person / character created by the trauma and things that have happened. So to me, what that represents is really what the destroyer wants is control. And the destroyer has this fundamental need to control, because the destroyer thinks that if I control everything, I'll be safe. It's not true, but that's, kind of, and it was created that way as a survival mechanism. Sorry, let me silence this. It was created as a survival mechanism. And so it seeks control, and when it can't control something, it tends to rebel against what it can't control. I've done it a million times. If I can't control something, or if I feel like I just have no, it's outside of something I can affect, I'll walk away. Even when I shouldn't, and that's happened, or I shouldn't say it's happened. I've done it more times than I can count, where I walked away from things I shouldn't because I just couldn't control it to the degree I wanted. Which is, again, it's all, you say the word control, and it's kind of got a bad connotation to a degree, and it's less about control, or it is control, but it's really control, as I said, as a mechanism for protection. So it's based in a self-protection sense, but it can actually come across, it can lead to negative things for sure.
I don't know if it's the destroyer or not, but once you've encountered death in a lot of different ways, you have a different gauge for what's dangerous, and so like your job, what you love doing and want to do is dangerous. My job, exceedingly dangerous, because there's times when there was nobody else but me, and then the sheikh that I'm trusting with my life. These are dangerous things. I was in a head-on collision with an Abrams tank on BIOP, Baghdad International Airport. And if you've had that happen and you walk away and you're like, hey, wow, all right. I mean, you kind of become a form of a superhero, maybe a supervillain. So the good side is that my bar for what's dangerous is way high. The bad side is my bar is so high that I don't respect other people's bars and where they're at. And so if they need something from me and they need me to understand that they're afraid, I mock them,
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot there. I think part of what you just said is, when you do repeated, so if you had never been shot at ever,
right,
and suddenly you get shot at, that's going to activate an ANS, autonomic nervous system response.
Right.
You're going to go into a fight, flight, freeze, fawn, whatever you want to call it. If that's happened to you 20 times, it's probably not going to activate anything, because at that point it's not new. It's not, your system, literally your nervous system, your body has been conditioned to that situation. So it's like, and I'll give you a perfect example of something that I experienced, exactly what you're saying. And that was when I came to Hollywood and started, working on films and TV and started doing stunts.
Yeah.
And, they're like, oh yeah, we're going to do this stunt, and, it's dangerous. And I'm like, looking at it, I'm like, that's not dangerous. You know what I mean? I'm like, it's not dangerous. And they're like, what do you mean? And I'm like, well, there's no way you can die. Like, you guys got a net, I'm picking out I'm jumping off a helicopter, but there's a net, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And I'm just thinking, this isn't dangerous. Like, and I saw like, my gauge after, doing that same stuff with no safety precautions whatsoever, right. I'm like, this isn't dangerous, but I completely understand what you're saying, which is, it really is sometimes hard to, it's hard to conceptualize what other people are thinking about certain situations when they're such a commonplace to you, and you just don't have the same gauge. You're just at two different places with the awareness of the same situation.
Expanding on that theme, talking to someone, not a source, but someone who might become a source, and we're having this conversation, and then we're in a spot in Mosul where there's always firefights, and so one breaks out, and I'm not being shot at. The guy I'm talking to is not being shot at, and so we're just kind of tucked up in a little cove. Now, every now and then, there's bits of concrete hitting us both in the face. We just wipe it off and keep talking. We kept talking the whole time. I didn't realize this for like 15 years. I'm like, holy shit, that's dangerous. I shouldn't have even been there. And then I realized and this is a while later, not like that day even, holy shit, that guy was glad to talk to me during this time, because for him also, he's like, yeah, this is part of my world. We're having a good conversation, just a conversation. And he was willing to stand there with me. And again, it just warped my sense of reality. It warped my sense of what I would be allowed to do in the real world, because that's the fake world. And I had a hard time taking off my combat glasses and seeing the real world for what it was, because I had different experiences. I couldn't tolerate waiting in line. I'm like, wait in line? I'm not going to wait in line. I'm more important than that. I've got things to do, And that was maybe a dick, and I'm not a dick. I'm not a dicky guy,
Well, so to that point, when you're waiting in line, and I'm going to use an exact other example, and you're waiting in line for food,
Yeah,
whatever,
right.
doesn't matter. But I'll give you another example of waiting in line. It's different but similar. Traffic.
Right.
Traffic, ultimately, if you break it down, is waiting in line ish. And I struggle probably more than anything I can think of offhand with traffic, or I shouldn't say traffic, driving in general. And going back to what you said, again, that way you feel waiting in line, ultimately, again, it's a control issue.
Yeah.
It's not that you're better. It's in your head, you're going, I need control. I have no control. I can't do what I need to do until I have to wait.
Yeah.
And I don't want to wait because I don't have any control over the timing of this. Same thing driving in specifically in traffic is a lot of people, the reason I'm mentioning traffic is, and I'm not saying this doesn't exist, but a lot of people, I think, and I drove quite a bit in Iraq, well, and Afghanistan, but more in Iraq. And, a lot of people go, oh yeah, people, guys freak out driving because they're worried about getting an IED. And that's why they freak out when they're driving.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that doesn't exist to a degree. Sure. I have no doubt that it does.
Yeah.
But that is a fundamental. You're taking something very small. Mm-hmm. You're taking a small piece and saying that small piece is the whole problem. Yeah. And it demonstrably is not. The whole problem is, again, it's a control issue. You have a control issue when you're driving. You hate other drivers and you road rage and you freak out in traffic. And again, I'm not saying worrying about IEDs isn't necessarily maybe a part of it for people, sure, but fundamentally it's a control issue and you don't have control in that environment. Other people can affect you, and that's what drives the destroyer crazy. So again, everyone's going, no, it's PTSD because you're worried about an IED. No, it isn't.
Yeah.
It's the destroyer wanting to control and can't.
For the most part, they got folks for those IEDs. And so if you're going to ride on a route, most of the time, except for when it's not the time, you can rely on those kids, babies that go out. And just, I know you know this, but anybody watching, there was a guy that drives around in what looks like a spider with the phone booth on top of it. And that dude sits there with tourniquets attached to arms and legs, because if he gets blown up, it's going to be all bad. And this kid is a kid. He's 18 to 20 years old tops. And he drives around. And I'm not saying he gets blown up every night, but these are the people that go out and do route clearance. And they are, no one ever talks about like the sacrifice those guys make. And that is a hard job to sit there with tourniquets in place, ready to go, because, the chance to save your life is so short. I wonder how those people do when they come back. And they're, by the way, they drive like 5 miles, 15 miles an hour tops, just creeping along looking for a bomb. And when they find it, then the real hard work begins. And thank God for those folks to go out and do that, because then for the most part, when we drive on these routes, for the most part, they're clear. And that's amazing to me. And I often forget about these folks that do these amazing things. Those people have combat tours filled with just the rubber band stretched as tight as it could be. And they don't know when it's going to snap. And it has to fuck them up.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. The whole... the whole IED situation in both Afghanistan and Iraq. Yeah. The first friend that I lost was a guy named Jay Blessing, who was, we were in the same squad together, and he got blown up by IED in Afghanistan, which is the first person that I knew. Mm-hmm. Actually, that was pretty early on, actually, but it's just very, look, it's war, you know what I mean? And IEDs, a lot of people are like, it's war. You can't say what, it's like when people go, oh man, IEDs are bullshit and chicken shit. And I agree with you.
Yeah.
But if I'm being honest, dude, watching dudes get absolutely nuked from a Spectre gunship, it's 20,000 feet in the air at night, and they can't even see anything. I'm like, that's not really fair either. You know what I mean? I'm like, yeah. And I just look at it and I go, look, man, dude, it's war. You know what I mean? It's there's no rules, to a degree, and it sucks. And the guys and girls that worked on clearing IEDs in multiple ways, because as you know, obviously there was dozens of different techniques and units, and I mean, it was just a thankless job, and we're lucky that those men and women did those jobs, and EOD. I mean, dude, I mean, that's bananas. So it's just, I'm glad that that was a rough, like Iraq 4, 5, 6, maybe 4, 5, 6. I mean, that was a rough time. Yeah, it was a rough time.
Yeah, when you're trying to run a source in that environment, they're getting whacked more than us.
Oh yeah.
And so I have to, if I'm doing my job right, I have to meet people. And so it was easier for me to go out to meet them, even though it was dangerous for me, because you can't wait for the customers to come in. And so and any kind of exposure to the camp meant that they weren't going to last long, because there was just no way to survive that reliably. Mm-hmm. And that means you have to expose yourself to as much, if not more, danger. And again, all of these things, they're all part of that warrior destroyer paradigm thing that you've created. And so I guess I want to take this in a different direction now. When you go and sit down in front of the wonderful people at the VA, not a VA criticism here, but when you sit down in front of them, and they're Long Beach, where it's a teaching hospital, so everybody there is trying to get their credentials, and they say something adorable to you like, what was the time? The time? No, the times. And no, you don't get to break open those wounds, multiple, right here during fucking intake. Intake is not the place. If you guys want to help me, get me a therapist. On the other hand, I've got to be good enough to find a therapist that works, know how to work the therapy system. Don't give up on group therapy. Don't give up on one-to-one therapy just because it doesn't go well once. Like, we're all great about getting in the gym and working out, curls and eating right and all that kind of stuff. But when it comes to our well-being, we are soft as fucking hell. We can't withstand what it takes. So there's a balance between what they have a right to do, and then there's also that side of like how we manage our mental health and what the responsibilities are.
Well, yeah. So you mentioned the VA, and I'll say that, first of all, people have to understand that the VA is a government organization.
Yeah.
And if you're a veteran, you worked for the government, and you know how messed up the government is. So to expect that the VA is going to be some amazingly efficient, organized, fast organization, no, it's not. It's part of the government. Like, so, as I tell people, the VA is the DMV for healthcare for veterans. And again, I'm not judging it. I'm saying that's what it is because of what it is.
Right.
There's a lot of good people in the VA, and like any organization, there's some bad ones.
Yeah.
No doubt about it, and but to your point, the most important thing, I think, is that what we as this generation, for lack of a better term, of veterans need to do is we need to recognize that the responsibility for our mental health, our overall health, is ours and ours alone. You cannot outsource your health or mental health to the VA.
Yeah.
I'm not saying you can't get treated. Excuse me.
Right.
I'm not saying you can't get treated. I'm not saying you can't get help, but you can't outsource the responsibility of it. You have to be your own case manager. You can see therapists, you can see all that, but you have to be your own case manager. And also on that note, you're the only one that can.
Yeah.
Because you're the only one that knows all the information. Yes. I could talk to a therapist every day for an hour, every day. I could talk to him every day for an hour for 10 years.
Yeah.
How much would they know about me?
Right.
Less than 1%.
Yeah.
And that's if I talk to him, you know what I mean? Like, no one knows what you know about you. And so you have to be your case manager. You have to be your own advocate. And you have to be aware that that responsibility is ultimately on you.
So we're talking a lot about the stuff that's in the book Forged in Chaos, but everybody, there's the link down below. It should be in the remarks over there. You know, I always say, buy two and buddy read this thing. It's fantastic. I loved it so many times. We're California kids, right?
Yep.
So a lot of our upbringing, same kind of time frame, is similar. And so we see the world in a lot of the same ways. But then there's times when we diverge. I guess I'll ask you this. So there's times when I'm reading the book and being your own case manager, I'm like, come on, Tyler. I keep an eye. I was like, come on, you got to make better decisions, man. But I also know that you can only do like what's in front of you, you know. And if your progress needs you to be here, then that's your zone, and then you can improve. And then when it gets bigger, and so as I'm reading the book, you absolutely lay all of your stuff out. And you're like, then I did this, you know, and you're pretty far into the book, and I'm like, will you get your shit together, you know? But we're all still getting our shit together. It's amazing.
Yeah, I tell people this constantly, which is, I can talk now about, you know, I can talk pretty easily now about what my problem was at that time, what I did wrong, what I should have, you know, I can talk about all that. I can talk about all the problems that I'm, you know, that I've had and that I'm aware of. And it sounds like, oh, you really, you know, you really have a good understanding of everything. And I do now. When I was in it, I didn't know any of the stuff that I know now. And I cannot stress the importance of that, or the significance of that enough, because the simple reality, and by the way, that was, and Lauren, my co-author, Lauren Gully, like, she convinced me, maybe not convinced me, she pitched it, and I'm like, that's a great idea. I don't know how much she convinced me, but I trust her implicitly. She's an amazing person and writer, but she was like, I think we should do it in present tense. Because because that's how you experienced it.
Right.
If you wrote it all in past tense, then it's like, and then how do you write in past tense, but not with the knowledge of what past tense gives you? So we wrote it, you know, do I sound like an idiot at times in the book, and I'm doing shit where you're like, this is so dumb? Absolutely. Because that's how it was at that time. Right. I didn't know what I didn't know. And the most important thing for me with this book, why I wrote it and why it's coming out, is I hope that people will read it and maybe they can recognize stuff that they're doing that I was doing and not do it anymore. I'm trying to give them in their present tense my understanding that I now have from past tense.
Speaking of people not knowing who you are and everything else, it's hilarious. Like when people on social media will throw shade at me, like, "Oh, you're a fat old man who's losing his hair," and I'm like, "You think that hurts my feelings? You ought to talk to the dude in the mirror, man. That guy. I'm horrible to myself. I am a monster to myself. When I hear these things come through, and I could say this in the present tense, now I go, hey, knock that off, Pete. Like, you're doing great. And so I do things to fix that part of my brain. But if I allow myself to, I'm not just my own worst critic. I am my own destroyer. And it is.
Yeah.
True.
Yeah. It's just, I can't stress enough how, like, self-worth, I'll use self-worth, which is obviously one of the main underlying themes, I would say, in the book.
Yeah.
But I'd been, actually, this isn't in the book, so I'll tell this briefly, but, you know, I've been working on the book casually, for lack of a better term, for 15 years. I'd written a ton of stuff, you know, in notebooks and diaries, and actually formally wrote stuff. I did a book, you know, proposal, you know, in like 2012, whatever.
Yeah.
And I knew I had things to say, but I just hadn't figured out. There was a piece I hadn't figured out, and that piece was the self-worth issue. When that finally became obvious to me, and when I really understood what the problem was, I understood, you know, how it happened. I understood why I didn't realize it. All these things, when I learned all that, which, by the way, was only about 3 years ago, that's when everything changed. Everything. My entire life changed. And that's when I went, oh my God. Because people go, it sounds so simple, but it's like, you know, I want to write a book. People will tell me this and I go, great. What's your book about?
Yeah.
And they go, well, it's going to be about my life. I go, great. That's not a book.
Yeah.
What's your book about?
Right.
You can tell your life story, but it has to be about something.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
What are you using your story to say?
Right.
What are you talking about? So like my book, and there's, you know, more than just one thing like any book, but I'm saying, yes, I'm telling my story, but what's it about? It's fundamentally about me finally realizing my own worth in a simple way, and not realizing it for a long time and making a crazy amount of mistakes because, and going back to what you said earlier in the conversation, the F-axis, it never occurred to me that I truly didn't understand what it meant. Yeah. And I'll use an example of this. I study. I've seen every serial killer documentary there is. I've seen all of them. I know all of them. I'm an encyclopedia on true crime. Same thing with narcissists and sociopaths, psychopaths, and like a sociopath. A sociopath, to a degree, understands what empathy is conceptually. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like they understand the theory of it. Like they know that, you know, you'll be sad if you watch somebody get hurt. Like they get that, but they just don't feel it and they don't really experience it. Yeah. So they know, but they don't really know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally.
For me, self-worth was the exact same way. I knew, or I had a concept of what I thought it was, but I had no real experience of understanding to truly get what it meant.
It takes a lot of courage to approach those things about ourselves like that, to examine ourselves in those ways, and to examine our loved ones, people that we love, who we're all imperfect in how we treat each other. You know, and I'm not trying to say that my parents were bad parents because they did their best with what they could do, but they a lot of times define what we end up as. You know, my dad was abusive, so I was out of the house and fields and ball, all kinds of things. And my mom had a bonk on the head in the 90s and hasn't quite been the same since then. And so my youth pastor, and this is just a couple years ago when I'm an old man, and we're still in contact, he says, Pete, you deserve to be loved. It blew me away. I hadn't even thought about the fact that I didn't think I was worthy of being loved at the parental level. Because my dad wasn't really great at showing. He had times when he was good, but when I hear, this is a good example. So when we were young, my friends and I were doing pictures, and we were doing Christmas cards. And they were silly and outrageous and all that kind of stuff. And the dad came home from a business trip. He'd been gone a couple of days. And I said, oh, shit, it's going to get crazy now. I got to get out of here, right? Because the dad is home. And he kissed his wife like he loved her. And I thought he was putting us on. Mm-hmm. And he's like, what are you guys doing? And then my friend's like, oh, we're taking pictures. We just lay it on top of your Lincoln Continental, you know, spread eagle, like it was a famous poster back in that day. We kind of emulated that with our butts out, just enough so you could see butt to make it funny. And he's like, that's hilarious. I want to help you guys do more. And I'm like, I had no idea that love worked like that, you know? And again, I'm not saying bad things about my parents, but I didn't realize I deserved love.
So it's really interesting, you know, I mean, I couldn't, you know, I totally know exactly what you're saying. And that pretty much is exactly my experience, which is, you know, I'll say it a different way, actually. So when I was younger, I looked at the kids in the neighborhood or at school, both really, that, you know, just had this, and again, at the time, I thought it was confidence, again, because I didn't really understand what self-worth meant, but I just thought they were confident. And I was trying to make sense of the world. So I would look at them and observe them and go, where is that coming from? Yeah. And I always found something. Oh, you know, they're good, super athletic. They're super good looking. They're, you know, girls like them. Their parents are rich. You know, they live in the high-end neighborhood. Whatever there was always something that I found that those kids had. And then I would go, oh, their confidence must be based in that. It never even occurred to me that their confidence was really self-worth. And it never occurred to me that their self-worth came from their parents actually loving them.
Yeah.
Never occurred to me. And I'll tell you when it occurred to me, as I said earlier, about 3 years ago.
Yeah.
That's when I suddenly was like, oh my God,
Yeah.
now it makes sense. Because then I think about their parents and, you know, they were just those type of parents. But I couldn't connect the two at the time. And the interesting thing I want to say is that we seem to think that people like self-worth is always based on something. And I'm saying that because it's critical. When people say, oh, no, your self-worth is based on nothing. It should be based on you loving yourself and you have worth and you don't need anything externally or internally even to base your self-worth on.
Right.
I disagree with that.
Okay.
And the reason I say that is because the way humans operate, we operate out of, you know, a chain of logic. You know, this means this, you know, that's how, if I'm going to argue something with you, I'm setting up logical steps that you go, oh yes, that's evident in reality. That's true. Right. So self-worth has to be based on something. And when people go, oh yeah, that, you know, the self-worth in children that have loving parents, what's it based on? It's based on their parents loving them. So,
big surprise.
But you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It is based on something. Those kids as children didn't go, I have worth randomly, right?
Yeah.
Like they have worth based on the love that their parents gave to them, the attention, getting their needs met. There's, you know, I don't want to go into the psychology of it, but it is based on something. There's also something that I've found, and everyone probably knows this person that's like level 10 confident, and I mean level 10 confident, but you can't figure out why. You know one of those people?
Sure,
I knew one where you're like, dude, I don't know where that confidence comes from, but it is like sky high. And there's definitely, I've met people that it's what it's based on, quite frankly, is a little bit of delusion. But what's weird about that delusion is it works. So is it delusional to a degree? Yes. But the effect is still the same as if it wasn't based in delusion.
Yeah.
And so, but it is based on something. And so, and the reason I'm saying that, sorry, I should mention why I'm saying that. Because now, let's say you know, you're the way you grew up, you didn't have self-worth. Now you're like, dude, I need to fix this. How do I go about it? Well, it still needs to be based on something. And the reason I'm saying that is, and I'm not saying affirmations aren't good. They are. Yeah. But they're not enough. They're not enough, and I'll take a Pepsi challenge to anyone that disagrees with that. Nice. If you think that you can say in the mirror that I deserve to be loved every fucking day for the next 10 years, and you're going to suddenly feel like you deserve to be loved after 10 years, I'm sorry, it ain't going to happen. Yeah. And the reason it's not going to happen is because when your brain was developing, that lack of worth and that feeling that you were unlovable was hardwired into the mechanisms of your brain and every freaking cell in your body. Yeah. It was hardwired. It was programmed. So just telling yourself that every day is not enough to undo that wiring and that programming. Yeah. So it takes more effort than just, you know, a simple conversation. And it has to be based on something. And there's, you know, tips and techniques that I go in on the YouTube channel that I'm building right now. But there are ways to do it. I just want to be clear, like it's not enough. You can't just decide I have worth. Yeah. It just doesn't. I wish it worked that easily, right? But it doesn't. Yeah. And the reason I said everything I just said is it didn't work that way as a kid either. Yeah. So it's not going to work that way now.
When you look at the modern world, there are so many things that we're supposed to do, like get up, jump into an ice bath, make sure you write in your gratitude journal. Make sure you do 20 minutes of yoga. Make sure you eat 2 pieces of ham. Yeah. And that all of a sudden, by the time I'm doing all the things that I make sure I'm doing, I don't have any fucking time to do anything.
You're preaching to the choir. I actually made a video for my YouTube called "I Wake Up at 8 a.m."
Yeah.
Because look, the whole I mean, it's like I've seen videos. There was some fitness influencer did this video where I wake up at 3:37 a.m. It was just this and I drink, and it was this crazy routine. By 6 a.m. in the morning, I've done more than you do in a day. And it was just like this, tough guy, freaking I'm better than you mentality. And it just doesn't help. It doesn't help. And in my opinion, I don't care. Yeah. Everyone is different. And, I'm not a morning person. And I disagree if someone makes the claim that you gotta wake up early to be successful. That's just not true, and it's demonstratively not true. Everyone is different, and you need to figure out a routine. And don't get me wrong, you should have tools and you should have things that help you be the person you want to be.
Yeah.
But as soon as here's the problem with what you just said.
Yeah.
The problem is, okay, I have to wake up at 5 a.m. I'm just making stuff up. Yeah. I have to wake up at 5 a.m. I have to do an ice bath.
Yeah.
I then have to do, 20 minutes of, stretching, whatever. I have to do that. And that's what I need to do to feel accomplished and feel all those things.
Right.
As soon as you set yourself up for that, what you're basically also inversely saying is, if you don't wake up at 5 a.m. and you don't do your ice bath,
right.
Well, now you suck. You failed.
Yeah.
You didn't do what you needed to do. And now that negative cycle of self-talk is worse than had you never set up that in the beginning.
Yeah. Boy, tons of agreement there. Yeah, and it's not that those things aren't good, right? They have their place. And I often mock like Jocko's. I got no problem with Jocko, but in some ways he's kind of a character. He's like, watch picture on Instagram, and I'm like, oh yeah, because we try harder where we're around here, and it's like at some point, like, you have to know yourself, know what matters to you. And if 8 o'clock is your sweet spot, and by the way, if that changes 2 years later, and now you're a 10 o'clock guy or a 4:30 in the morning or whatever, right? You got to kind of be where you're at, but hold yourself accountable enough that you're accounting for what you're doing, right? And so I don't know where the balance is. Life's all that shit.
Yeah, I mean, Jocko, I've never met him personally, but Jocko, what Jocko's done a great job of is, what his brand is.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And from what I've been told, he is his brand.
Yeah.
His brand is him, I guess is a better way to say it.
Yeah.
And and his brand and what he does works. I mean, demonstratively, he's crushing it, killing it.
Yeah.
And so it works great for him. His principle, and again, there's things that he does that just quite frankly wouldn't work for me because we're two different people. But what he says, which I freaking couldn't agree more with, is his concept of extreme ownership.
Yeah.
When I was just talking about the VA stuff,
sure.
Ultimately, boil down what I said differently. It's extreme ownership of your own mental health and health. It's the same general concept.
Yes.
Or I wouldn't even say it's a concept. It's kind of just a fundamental law. So it's, I feel like, guys like Jocko and Goggins, they are on brand for them, and people like them will get amazing results from their what they're teaching because it's for that group.
Right.
What I feel like I'm doing with my book, or what I was trying to do, was I was trying to write a book that was, for people that aren't like that.
Yeah.
And again, that's no critique of anyone, but I was trying, I'm not a morning person. I'm not, I don't know how I woke up at 5 a.m. for years in the middle. I literally, I look back and go, how did I do that? Youth, I guess. But I was trying to write a book that was for people that were, different than kind of the messages, that were currently out there and have been out there for a while. This guy's been doing it for a while.
That book right here below, in pre-sales now, comes out with
July 15th.
July 15th.
Yeah, July 15th.
July 15th. Here's the link. Or just go to Amazon and type in Tyler Gray for crying out loud. You'll see his fearsome mug on the front of it, and you will figure it out. But yeah, buy 2 of those things and read them and see if it vibes with somebody. Here's the thing about books too, and a book like this that's got a lot of help in it. If you sense that one of your friends is someone like that, send it to them and be like, hey, let's read this thing together and go for a walk and discuss it. It's definitely a good book. It is not what you expect from the stand. And you say it right up front, like, you know, and if I ever write my book, it'll be the same kind of thing where like, I'm not a superhero, you know, I didn't do all this alone. I made all the mistakes that I'm talking about, but here's when I figured them out, you know, and I don't know if I need to write a book or not, but it'll be kind of like that. Your book is similar. Like, okay, no shit, there you were in the hallway, but it's a whole lot of other stuff in there too. And it is this journey. And I guess there's some fearlessness in that, displaying all of these bad decisions that you made and you know, bad relationships and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, I know it's strange because, you know, you use the word fearlessness. I don't. It's not fearlessness. What I see it as is detachment.
Okay.
I am unhealthily detached from feeling a lot of the things in the book, and I'll give you a great example. You know, we do the writing process, Lauren and I, over, I don't know, year and a half. I mean, literally talking to her every day for like 4 or 5 hours every day. And, you know, we're going over stories and, you know, a million times. And I can tell the story of the worst day or moment of my life. I can tell that story to you right now, just like I'm talking. Literally, worst experience of my life. I could tell it just like this. And people go, oh, wow, that's, you know, you seem great. It doesn't matter to you. It's, you know, fearless or whatever. Yeah. It's not. It's detachment. I don't feel it. Yeah. And I don't feel it because I shut off emotion when I was very young. Yeah. And I have trouble feeling. And so what's weird is when the book was written, or, you know, those subjects were written, and I had to go back and read it, you know, editing, and it's a whole process. And I'm reading it now. So I'm not telling it, I'm reading it. Yeah. Well, obviously I know what happens. Yeah. It's in my life. So I'm reading it. I know what happens. And yet there's this part of me that would read something bad that happened and I would get really sad. Yeah. And I was like, that's weird. And what I realized was when I'm telling the story, there's no, it's coming from me, so I'm not connected to it. Yeah. When I'm reading it, now it feels like it's someone else. There's a level of detachment. And now I'm actually feeling, to a degree, my own story. Yeah. And that was really, I did not expect that. I was very shocked by it. And so there was a cathartic process of reading my own story, because that gave me the ability to feel it more than I had probably in my entire life. Yeah.
It resonated with me. I mean, there were times when I would just block out whole sections and go like, agreement, you know, and even if it's a segment of 25 words, you know, that's a lot out of a book to be like 100%. Like, this is how it went. And Scott's book is fantastic. Echo and Ramadi.
Oh, yeah,
yeah. The emotions I got, and it's just because of who we are. I was like, God, I needed to be there for those guys, because that's my job, right? My job is to go out and deploy with you guys. Be like, do not worry about the intel collection. I'll handle all of it. I'll do all the reporting. I'm just going to do what I can to either protect us or protect the big army, you know, in general. And when people die because I didn't do my job, which isn't the thing, but that's how I'm wired, right? I'm like, I have to go out every day. That's why I've got 1,000 combat missions. Like, you're leaving the camp, I got to go with you. Nobody can be out more than me. I have to go. And then inevitably, you know, when I see Scott and his guys just, you know, going through this rough time, and I'm like, oh, I need to be there. And even though it's not possible, because it already happened.
Oh, yeah.
And I wasn't even in the area with them. I have this deep desire. And so I had a similar kind of thing with you, where as you're going through this, I used to live in Vegas. I was Captain Morgan when I lived in Vegas. Nice. We got hired somewhere back, it'd be me, right? And it is a crazy lifestyle. I didn't have your way over here, like with like partying and everything else. But I still struggled mightily with there's a lot of things available to you in Vegas.
Yeah, it's a dark place.
It's a dark place. And it's wonderful at the same time. But if you don't need to be in that place, boy, you can see a lot of negative things. So your book gave me emotions that probably aren't available to a lot of people, because they haven't gone through this thing. And I would say in my field, counterintelligence, I think we self-select sociopaths. You know, we're just like, hey, I'm gonna do, and I'm not saying 100% sociopath, but we all have some percentage of these things in us.
It's fun. It's funny you say that because about 3 minutes ago, I was thinking of something related to this. So it's funny you bring it up.
Yeah.
So there was a time. Well, so there was a time where I thought I was a sociopath.
Yeah.
And which is also, to be frank, completely ridiculous because I have a ton of empathy for a lot of things. So, but what I was confused by, and look, we all, or almost everyone, has sociopathic qualities. You know, one, you know, what makes a true sociopath is a bunch of them. You know what I mean? That's the difference between a normal person and a sociopath is they have way more than a normal person. That's what qualifies them. But I was like, I was concerned about it for a while, and the reason I was concerned is because there was just so many things I don't feel. And I mean a lot of things. Like I remember, you know, I tell the story about, you know, watching a guy die. I felt nothing, absolutely nothing from that. You know, so many things where people have these massive emotional responses. I have nothing, and I mean nothing. And so there was a time where I was like really concerned that I was a sociopath. And yeah, this is funny. I asked my therapist at the time, and she goes, "Tyler, if you were a sociopath, you wouldn't be worried that you were a sociopath." And I was like, "Oh yeah, touche." I'm like, touche. That's very fair, you know. But the reason, but to finish that, I want to say, like, it's not. I don't think honestly that there are some. But I actually don't think that there's a lot of sociopaths in special operations, counterintelligence. I think there are a lot of people that have numbed emotion to the point of non-feeling. And that is through trauma. And that is a very different thing than a true psychopathy where they don't have the ability to feel empathy. You know, and there are, but like Ty Lopez did this freaking thing on his whatever I saw. He's like, yeah, there's a ton of sociopaths. What the hell does he know? But a ton of sociopaths. The most sociopaths are in Navy SEALs or whatever. And again, I'm not saying he wasn't quoting some, you know, study or survey or whatever. But again, they're wrong. And they're looking at a lack of feeling and assigning it to being sociopaths. But the actual cause of the lack of feeling is a trauma response of being hurt, the creation of the destroyer, and the destroyer says, I'm just not going to feel anymore. And that's very different than a true sociopath.
Yeah, and I guess when I'm talking about sociopaths, you know, if you think about like a video game character and you have 20% sociopathic tendencies, then, okay, great. And then if that scale can move as you age, degrade, whatever it is, and all this, you know, any of us who are in our midlife, the things that make us the worst person, if we don't check those and deal with them, they don't get better as we get older. So maybe that's kind of how I mean, like, if you have these things, but you do have to compartmentalize, right? Like I have this thing called my book of woe, because I'm talking to people and they're like, and then my son was assassinated in front of my face. And the very next day, my husband had his head cut off in front of the 7-Eleven. And you're like, I'm like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And I'm desperate to try to help these folks because I want to help them. But I am helpless. I'm without help for them because I'm part of the stupid army. You know, like we met this lady who her husband had died, and that made her a whore in Iraq. Like, oh, you're a whore. Maybe she was, right? Maybe. So we gave her a cow. She lived in a building that was just two sides of what was left of a house. And so a corner was her house. And that corner was degraded. Like it wasn't even like a full. So that's where she lived, in the back of her husband's brother's field, right? And I'm like, could we do something about this lady? Like, well, we gave her a cow. Like, yeah. You know, and these things you just stuff in your locker of the things that I'm not going to pay attention to until it burst. And I couldn't hold those things in anymore. And I didn't have the ability to deal with them. So a lot of them just flooded down the river unfelt, you know? And I think, and I've struggled to try to characterize what that is. And I think you might have some idea.
So, yeah, there's a lot here. So the reason I studied serial killers,
Yeah.
And again, the by and large, what the mental health community thinks about serial killers is wrong,
Okay.
and there's a lot of things that are just absolutely incorrect, and they'll figure it out over time, but it's not the place to go into it now. But the reason I was so interested and fascinated by them is because there were things when I would watch interviews with serial killers, there were things that they would say that I would go, well, I know what they're saying.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? I understand certain mentalities, or you know what I mean? Like, I understand certain problems that they experience.
Okay.
And I would go, oh, that's really interesting. And you see how it builds, right? And then, like, compartmentalization is a great example of something where, you know, compartmentalization starts in childhood, and it's a way to compartmentalize. You know, it's a way to isolate pain, right? Mm-hmm. And the reality is, then when you do, you know, the jobs that we're talking about, first responders, and military, all those things, but doctors, you know, people work in medical, I should say, but the compartmentalization to a degree is necessary to do the job. And the reason it's necessary to do the job is because there's no time in the duties of the job to let the feeling compartment will mess up the doing compartment, for lack of a better term, right? Yeah. So you have to isolate the feeling, emotion compartment to operate in the logic action compartment, right? And that's fine. It works while you're doing the job. Yeah. And then once the job's over, what happens with those compartments is when you fill them up enough, they start to overflow. And the one of the biggest things that I've had to work towards is destroying my compartments. And it's hard, but you have to destroy the compartments. And one of the ways you destroy the compartments is basically confiding all the contents in all those compartments to someone that you trust. Yeah. Let all of the information that's in those compartments out, and you have to destroy them. And then once you destroy them, the key is the integration of all of the different compartments into one. Right. And then being comfortable with all the compartments flowing together. And the going back to the serial killer part is compartmentalization. Like, how does a serial killer kill a woman? Right. Because they place that they don't see that person as a person. They see that person as an object, and then they take what they did and they place that in a compartment. Yeah. So again, and why did they do that? Again, you can look at their childhood and figure out almost every serial killer I've ever watched. Right. You can see where the process that built that system. Very few people are there's always a series of building. Mm-hmm. It's always a pressure cooker. No one is completely normal, right, and then one day it goes bananas. Yeah. It's a slow build of small incremental factors, and the pressure in the pressure cooker builds and builds and builds and builds, and then it explodes. Yeah. I would say without exception, you can say that's true for serial killers. You can say that's true for mass shooters, mass murderers. It's all the same system. And by the way, it's across all cultures. It's the same mechanism across all cultures.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, like that Brian Koberger case where
Idaho.
If we believe the book from Howard Bloom, who was on my show before, he was having an argument with himself and driving to and from and trying to like withstand it or talk himself into it, whichever it was. There was a struggle there until, if what we believe happened, until he went in and went bananas, right? And so he reached his limit. And so that makes me wonder, like, there's so many times where we do things in the military, like, I can't believe that worked. And I'll ask someone, like, out of 1,000, how many times does that work? And I'll give you an example. So my buddy's a Marine, comes back on the post life side of the contract side, really working for the government. And he's advising this unit that he used to be in, and he knows the ops boss. And they're like, hey, we got to kill someone because this is our job. We got to kill someone. We're going to kill Bob. That's the guy we're going to kill. Bob's in town. And he's like, well, hey, hang on. Let me look into Bob. And that's his job. So he goes and looks at Bob, and he's like, you cannot kill Bob. Because you kill Bob, you're killing bam, bam, all of these things. By the way, about to be a legitimate part of this legitimate government. And so I asked him, and I'm like, how many times out of 1,000 does that get fixed? He's like, could I have done it, right? And he's like, you could never have done it because you're not a Marine. I happen to be a Marine, happen to know the ops guy, and he gave me the grace to give me the 2 weeks to make sure they didn't fuck something up, right? And so sometimes we get in these very narrow avenues where a Brian Koberger could be interdicted by somebody, something, and it could pull them out. But most of the time it doesn't happen, you know? And so we all live our lives in these things where there's just, you run out of odds and then this inevitable thing. I like to think about a twist of fate or a fated twist. And sometimes there's just a fated twist that fucks you up in a way that you don't recover from.
Yeah. I think it's a really, there are so many factors, you know what I mean? There's so many factors with when you're talking about, you know, whether it's compartmentalization or shut off emotion, like the concept of the destroyer, you know, you talked about somebody stepping in or whatever. The biggest problem that I realized about the warrior and destroyer was that I didn't know which one was me. And that was a key, actually probably the key struggle. When I talked about, like, I thought I was a sociopath. I should have mentioned this at the time. When I thought I was a sociopath, why did I think I was a sociopath? Because I was looking at the things that the destroyer did and was like, I think I'm that.
Yeah.
When in reality, I really actually knew that I was the warrior side. That was the real me, quote unquote. But I was looking at the things that the destroyer did, the actions and the thoughts the destroyer had, which were destructive and negative and dark. And I was like, oh shit, I'm worried that that's the real me. Yeah. And so if a person is watching this and they have, one of my favorite movies of all time, Star Wars. Yeah. Why is Star Wars one of my, well, there's many reasons, but I think one of the reasons Star Wars is so massive in our culture is because I don't care if you like or care about the movies or not, everyone can identify with and understand the concept of the Force and the dark side. Yeah. That is something that every person has experienced. And so we all go, oh, I get that mechanism, right? So the destroyer is the dark side, and the warrior is the Force, and again, it's portrayed so well in the movie that, dude, everyone can go either way at times, and it ultimately is a choice that you have to decide which side. The tale of the two wolves, which side you're going to feed, right? Yeah. You got to decide which path you're going to go on. But if you look at the arc of the Vader character, ultimately, he's choosing the dark side for a long time. Yeah. And then at the end, he goes back, and you can make the argument. I would make the argument that he was choosing the dark, but he was never truly dark. Yeah. You see what I'm saying? Yeah, he was just making bad choices, but he wasn't fundamentally that way. Yeah. And I would argue that, not to compare myself to Vader, but I would argue that for me, my journey was the same way, where I was choosing self-destruction and darkness and the dark side for a long time, but it was never who I was. Yeah. And every time I chose something dark, I hated myself for it, which in one way made me not want to do it, but the self-hate of it made me choose another dark thing again. Yeah. And that cycle continued for a long time until I finally realized this isn't who I really am. And understanding that all the the destroyer was a reaction, a normal reaction to experience, then I realized that I was able to separate my experiences from who I was innately.
Yeah, that's great. I've had you for an hour, so I don't want to keep you anymore. I've got more questions.
Yeah,
but,
yeah, yeah.
You
No,
know,
no,
it's
ask away.
that's the deal. I asked you for an hour, and you gave it to me, and I thank you for that.
Yeah, no.
So everybody watching, Tyler Gray, awesome, right? There's the book link right over here. Make sure you go to Amazon. It's pre-sales now. I just bought one this morning.
Oh, awesome.
Even though I have it in soft copy, now I've got the hard copy
Well,
coming. So thank you very much. I hope the book does really well. What do you want to say in closing, and then I'll wrap this thing up.
In closing, I just the easiest way I can say it is if anyone is experienced, if anyone's struggling with identity, purpose, there's so many self-worth. If you're struggling with anything, I wrote the book to try and get people to see themselves in my story. And then, as you know, at the end of the book, it's not just my story. At the end of the book, I give lessons and ways to start on recovery and on a better path. And so if anyone, feels like they're at a point where they need, they need help with something, I would give the book a look and see if it works for you.
Love it. Stand by.